Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we dive into our brand new episode, let's recap the strategic and thrilling events from our last story. With Nathan Price's physical threat neutralized, the war for Heartland shifted to a new battlefield, the courts and the media. Lou and Peter stepped up, leading a brilliant two-pronged assault. After facing initial rejection from her former allies, Lou found a hungry international journalist and armed him with a devastating thread. Meanwhile, Peter, in a painstaking forensic analysis of Nathan's finances, discovered the explosive link between his shell corporations and Prince Ahmed's criminal syndicate. The episode ended with the first taste of victory, as the resulting media firestorm allowed their lawyers to secure a crucial injunction, freezing Nathan's assets and legally blocking him from taking possession of the Heartland property. Now, today, after months of a grueling legal war, the final verdict is in. The war had changed its shape. The visceral and immediate terror of the fight for survival in the mountains had been replaced by a different and in many ways more grueling kind of a battle. It was a war of an attrition, fought not in the stormy wilderness, but in the sterile and unforgiving landscapes of a courtrooms and a news cycles. The months that followed their return from Nathan's fortress were a long and cold and bitter winter, both in the landscape of the Alberta foothills and in the landscape of their own and weary souls. The Dude Ranch was their fortress, but it was also their prison. They watched as the world debated their truth, as Nathan Price's army of lawyers and public relations experts waged a brilliant and insidious campaign of disinformation. The battle for their home had become a battle for their very name, a slow and methodical and soul-crushing siege. Lou and Peter were their generals in this new war, their days a relentless and exhausting blur of illegal strategy sessions, of secret meetings with their one trusted journalist, of a painstaking and forensic dissection of Nathan's paper empire. They were fighting to reclaim a truth that had been stolen and buried under a mountain of well-crafted lies. The family waited, their lives suspended in a state of a profound and agonizing uncertainty. They were together, and they were safe, but they were not yet free. They were a family in a holding pattern, waiting for a verdict, not just from a judge, but from the world itself. The day the war ended, it did not begin with a bang, but with a quiet and heavy and almost unbearable silence. The family was gathered in the main lodge of the Dude Ranch, a small and huddled and anxious tribe. The television was on, tuned to a national news channel, its volume a low and tense murmur. The air in the room was thick with the unspoken and collective prayer of a family that had been pushed to the very brink of its own endurance. They were all there, a silent and supportive and deeply and terrified wall of a shared hope. We are now standing by for the final verdict in what has been called the trial of the decade, here in Canada, the case of the Crown versus Nathaniel Price. After months of a testimony and a week of tense jury deliberations, we are told a verdict has finally been reached. The camera cut to a live shot outside the Calgary courthouse, a chaotic and rain-swept scene of reporters huddled under a sea of black umbrellas. The family leaned forward, their bodies a single and unified and tense line. The charges are extensive, ranging from a corporate fraud and a stock manipulation on a global scale to multiple counts of a kidnapping and an assault. The prosecution has painted a picture of a ruthless and sociopathic predator, while the defense has argued that Mr. Price is the tragic victim of an elaborate and violent conspiracy orchestrated by the very family he was trying to save, the Bartlett Fleming family. We are getting word now. The jury is entering the courtroom. The silence in the lodge was absolute. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the frantic and hammering rhythm of a dozen and shared and terrified hearts. We have the verdict on the charge of a kidnapping. In the case of Borden, we the jury find the defendant, Nathaniel Price, guilty. A single and sharp and collective gasp went through the room. On the charge of a kidnapping, in the case of an Amy Fleming, guilty. On all 17 counts of a corporate fraud, guilty. On the charge of a conspiracy to commit arson, guilty. The word, a beautiful and powerful and final and glorious drumbeat, echoed in the silent room. Guilty. Guilty, guilty. And in a related civil ruling handed down just moments ago by Justice Alistair Finch, the court has declared the sale of the historic Heartland Ranch property to be null and void, citing overwhelming evidence of a criminal fraud and a coercion. The ownership of the land has been officially and fully restored to the Bartlett Fleming family. For a single and profound and heart-stopping moment, no one moved. The words, the beautiful and impossible and hard-won, words seemed to hang in the air, too fragile and too wonderful to be real. And then the dam broke. A sound, A raw and guttural and triumphant sob was torn from Lou's chest. Peter wrapped his arms around her, lifting her from her feet in a fierce and powerful and victorious embrace. The two generals of a long and brutal war finally allowing themselves to feel the pure and unadulterated joy of their own and impossible victory. Tim let out a great and booming and beautiful laugh, a sound of a pure and unburdened relief that had not been heard from him in a very, very long time, and he grabbed Scott in a crushing and brotherly bear hug. Ty turned to Amy, and the last of his own, and carefully constructed walls of a stoic and soldierly control completely and utterly crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the soft and familiar and beloved scent of her hair, and his own body was racked with a single and profound and silent and deeply and relieved sob. The weight, the immense and crushing and suffocating weight of the fire of the wanted poster, of the world's condemnation, was finally and completely lifted from his shoulders. Jack Bartlett sat in his armchair and watched them, a silent and stoic and deeply and emotional patriarch. He watched as his battered and bruised and broken and beautiful family celebrated the end of their long and dark and terrible winter, and a single and proud and grateful tear traced a slow and quiet and victorious path down his weathered and leathery and loving cheek. The war was over. They had won, and they were, finally and truly and completely and irrevocably home. The pure and unadulterated joy of the verdict was a brilliant and blinding flash of a light after a long and dark winter. But like the after-image of a flash, it left a strange and disorienting haze in its wake. The war was over, but the battlefield was still a ruin. The family spent the next day in a quiet and surreal state of a disbelief, the good news so immense it was difficult to fully process. They were free. The words were simple, but the meaning was a vast and uncharted territory they were only just beginning to explore. They were still living in the borrowed and crowded space of the Dude Ranch Lodge, a constant and physical reminder that while they had won the war, they had not yet found their way home. The atmosphere was lighter, the oppressive weight of an uncertainty lifted, but a deep and bone-weary exhaustion had settled in its place. They were survivors, adrift on a life raft waiting for the sight of a land. The call that would determine the shape of that land came the following afternoon. It was for Lou. She took it in the makeshift war room, her expression shifting from a cautious curiosity to a stunned disbelief. She hung up the phone and walked back into the main lodge, where the rest of the family was gathered. Every eye turned to her.
That was the premier's office.
What those bastards want? To send us a bill for the cost of the manhunt?
Lou ignored his cynicism, her own mind clearly reeling from the proposal she had just heard.
They want to make a formal apology, on behalf of the provincial government, for the way the investigation was handled, for the way our family was treated. They want to make a gesture, a public one.
What kind of a gesture?
They're proposing a ceremony in Hudson this Friday. They want the premier to personally return the restored deed for Heartland to us, in front of the entire town, with the full press corps in attendance.
The proposal landed in the quiet room with the weight of a dropped stone. The initial reaction was not one of a joy, but of a collective and instinctual recoil.
In public? With cameras?
Amy's voice was a small and horrified whisper. The thought of a stepping back into the harsh and judgmental glare of the public spotlight was a physically nauseating one. She had just finally found a safe harbor. The idea of a willingly sailing back out into the stormy sea of a public opinion was unthinkable.
No.
Ty's response was immediate and absolute. He had spent the last few days in a quiet and focused state, his entire being dedicated to the simple and beautiful and necessary work of just being a father and a husband again. The outside world, with its lies and its cameras and its monstrous caricature of him, was a thing he never wanted to face again.
No parades. No photo ops. We've been a public spectacle for long enough. We just want to go home. Quietly.
For once, I agree with him. To hell with them. Where were the politicians when Nathan was burning our home to the ground? They were hiding. Now that the smoke has cleared and they see which way the wind is blowing, they want to come out and act like they were on our side all along. It's a pathetic and self-serving and political stunt, and I want no part of it.
The sentiment was a powerful and unifying one. They were a wounded family, and their instinct was to retreat, to lick their wounds in a private and protective and quiet space. But Lou, the strategist, the woman who had fought this war on the front lines of a public opinion, saw it differently. She saw not a political stunt, but a strategic necessity.
I understand why you all feel that way. I do, but you're wrong.
She looked at each of them, her own expression one of a passionate and frustrated conviction.
Nathan's lies were public. The wanted posters were public. The news reports that called us criminals, they were public. We can't just go home quietly and pretend that none of that happened. If we do, the whispers will always be there. The doubt, the story will be that the rich and powerful Bartlett Fleming family used their influence to get the charges dropped. Nathan's lies will become a conspiracy theory, a myth that will haunt our family for generations.
She took a deep breath, her own voice rising with a fierce and protective and powerful energy.
We have to kill that myth. We have to do it publicly and definitively and on our own terms. This ceremony, it's not for them, it's for us. It's the final and most important battle of this entire war. It's the battle for our name, and it is a battle we have to be seen to win.
The family was divided, caught at a crossroads. The quiet and private path of the survivor, or the loud and public and difficult path of the victor. They were a family at war with its own and new and fractured identity, and they did not know which way to turn. Lou's passionate and strategic argument hung in the tense air of the lodge. The family was a fractured landscape of conflicting emotions. Tim's bitter and wounded pride, Ty and Amy's deep and exhausted desire for a quiet sanctuary, Lou's fierce and pragmatic need for a public vindication. They were a family at a crossroads, and every path forward was fraught with a pain. In the heavy silence that followed, every eye in the room, one by one, turned to the still and quiet figure in the armchair by the fire. They turned to Jack. He had been a silent witness to their debate, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, his hands resting on the worn arms of his chair. He had listened, his expression unreadable, as his family had wrestled with the shape of their own and new and fractured identity. He was the patriarch, the anchor, the moral compass, and this was a decision that could not be made without his blessing. He seemed to feel the weight of their collective gaze. He let out a long and slow sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weariness of the entire last 4 years. He finally and slowly lifted his head, his pale blue eyes moving from one face to the next, acknowledging the pain and the fear and the anger that he saw in each of them.
Tim, you're right to be angry.
His voice was a low and quiet rumble, but it commanded the absolute and unwavering attention of the entire room.
This town, these politicians, they turned their backs on us when we needed them most. They listened to the lies of a rich man with a good story, and they threw our family to the wolves. Your anger is an honorable thing. It's the anger of a man who has seen his family betrayed.
He then turned his gaze to Ty and Amy, his expression softening.
And you two, you have been through a hell that no one in this world should ever have to walk through. You have been hunted and haunted and dragged through the mud in front of the entire world. All you want now is a little bit of a peace, a quiet place to heal, to just be a family again. And there is nothing in this world more right or more understandable than that.
He had given them all their due. He had validated their pain, and now he would give them his wisdom.
But Lou is right, too.
A flicker of a surprise crossed Tim's face.
That man, Nathan Price, he didn't just burn down our house. He tried to burn down our name. He tried to turn the very idea of a Heartland into a lie. For 100 years, that name, this family, it has stood for something in this valley. It has stood for a second chances. It has stood for a healing. It has stood for a home, for a people, and for a horses that the world had given up on. It was never just our home. It was a part of the heart of this whole community.
He leaned forward slightly, a new and powerful energy suffusing his frail frame.
And when a thing like that is attacked in a public, you can't just let the whispers and the lies be the last word. You have to stand up in front of the whole world, and you have to tell the truth. You have to show them that the fire didn't take a thing that truly matters. You have to show them that our family's promise, the promise of this land, was not broken. It was just tested.
He looked at each of them, his gaze a powerful and loving and absolute and non-negotiable command.
This isn't for the premiere. It's not for the cameras. It's for your mother, Amy. It's for my wife. It's for every generation of this family that poured their heart and their soul into that land. I need to stand there. I need to take back that deed, not for me, but for them. We will go, and we will go together.
His quiet and powerful and deeply and honorable words were the final word. The debate was over. The family was no longer divided. They were a unit again. their individual pains now subsumed by a larger and shared and sacred purpose. They would do it for Jack, for Heartland. The day of the ceremony arrived, a crisp and clear and achingly beautiful autumn morning. The air in the Dude Ranch Lodge was thick with a nervous and somber and deeply and anticipatory energy. The family moved through the familiar space, their movements a quiet and purposeful preparation for a battle of a very different kind. They were putting on their Sunday best, their formal clothes a strange and ill-fitting armor that felt like a costume from a different and long-forgotten life. Lisa stood behind Jack, her hands steady as she straightened the collar of his best tweed jacket, her expression a mask of a quiet and loving and fierce pride. Amy knelt before a squirming Lindy, trying to tie a blue ribbon in her hair, a small and ordinary act of a motherhood that felt in this moment like a profound and defiant and beautiful act of a hope. Ty and Tim stood by the door, two silent and imposing, sentinels in a dark suits, their old and complicated and fractious history now a solid and unspoken and unbreakable wall of a shared purpose. They were a family, preparing not for a celebration, but for a solemn and public and deeply and necessary reclamation of their own and battered and unbroken soul. The convoy of trucks and SUVs carrying the Bartlett Fleming family moved slowly down the main street of Hudson. It was a journey they had made 1,000 times, but today it felt like they were driving through a foreign country. They were braced for whispers, for stares, for the lingering ghosts of the poison Nathan Price had spread. They were not prepared for what they saw. The town was not just waiting for them, it was holding its breath for them. The streets were lined with people, a quiet and solemn and deeply respectful crowd. There were no news vans jockeying for position, no shouting reporters. There were just the familiar faces of their neighbors, their friends, the people who were the very fabric of their lives. They held handmade signs, simple and powerful, and heartbreakingly sincere. "Welcome home, Jack. Hudson stands with Heartland. We're sorry." The convoy came to a stop in front of the town hall, where a small, formal stage had been erected. The family got out of their vehicles, a small and battered and unbroken line. A moment of a profound silence fell over the square, and then a single person began to clap. The sound was followed by another, and then another, until the quiet, respectful silence erupted into a thunderous and sustained and deeply an emotional wave of an applause. It was not a cheer for a celebrity. It was an apology. It was a welcome. It was a town trying, in the only way it knew how, to say that it had been wrong, and that it was so very, very glad to have its heart back. The mayor of Hudson, Rick, a good man who had been caught in an impossible political storm, was the first to speak at the podium. His voice was thick with an emotion, his expression one of a deep and personal and public shame. "There are no words to truly express the depth of our community's regret. I failed you. We let fear and lies and the slick words of a monster cloud our judgment. We forgot who you are. We forgot what the Bartlett Fleming family has meant to this town, to this valley, for over a century. For that, on behalf of the town of Hudson, I am profoundly and humbly sorry. Welcome home." He was followed by the Premier of Alberta, a woman whose office had once dismissed Lou's frantic calls. Her tone was more formal, but no less powerful. She spoke of the family's resilience, of their integrity in the face of an unprecedented and malicious attack. She spoke of the government's commitment to ensuring that such a perversion of a justice would never happen again. And then she got to the heart of the matter. The law is a powerful and necessary instrument, but it is slow, and sometimes it is blind. Today we are here to correct a great and terrible wrong, a wrong that was committed not just against a single family, but against the very idea of a home, of a legacy. Today we are here to give back what was stolen. Her voice rose, a clear and powerful and resonant declaration that echoed across the silent and captivated square. "It is my profound honor on behalf of the government and the people of Alberta to ask Mr. Jack Bartlett to please join me on the stage." The applause that followed was a physical force, a tidal wave of a love and a respect, and a deep and abiding affection for the man who was the quiet and steady and unwavering soul of their entire community. The family watched, their own eyes shining with a fierce and unshed tears of a pride. They watched as their patriarch, their anchor, their grandpa, began his slow and deliberate and dignified walk to the stage. He was frail, the long and terrible winter having taken its toll. But in that moment, as he walked through the sea of his own and beloved people, he was the strongest and most powerful man on earth. He reached the stage, shaking the Premier's outstretched hand with a firm and rancher's grip. She turned, and an aide brought forward a large and ornate and official-looking document, its thick and cream-colored paper adorned with the bright and red wax seal of the provincial government. It was the deed, the legal and spiritual and absolute proof of their ownership, of their home, of their very name. The premier held it out to him. "Mr. Bartlett, on behalf of a grateful province, welcome home to Heartland." Jack took the deed. He held the heavy and significant and beautiful document in his two gnarled and weathered hands. The flashbulbs of the official photographers erupted, capturing the single and iconic and historic moment. The crowd roared its approval, a beautiful and cathartic and deafening symphony of a joy. The family stood together, a small and weeping and beautiful and unbreakable island in the center of the storm of a love. And Jack Bartlett stood on the stage, his face a mask of a quiet and profound and deeply and hard-won and beautiful victory. The king had returned to his kingdom. The roar of the crowd was a warm and healing and physical wave that washed over the stage. Jack Bartlett stood for a long moment, the heavy and official document clutched in his hands, and he let the sound, the beautiful and repentant and loving sound of his town, his community, his home, wash away the last of the winter's chill. He looked out at the sea of familiar faces, at the tearful and smiling and apologetic eyes of the people he had known his entire life. He was not a politician. He was a rancher, and he had never been a man for fancy speeches. He stepped to the podium, and a respectful hush fell over the square. He did not lean on the lectern. He stood straight, his frail frame infused with a quiet and timeless and powerful dignity.
Thank you.
His voice, amplified by the microphone, was a familiar and gravelly rumble, the sound of an old rock of a permanence.
Thank you all for being here today. The last few months, they've been a hard road for all of us. There have been a lot of lies told, a lot of hurt. But this town, this valley, it's a good place. It's full of good people. And sometimes good people they lose their way for a little while. I'm just glad you all found your way back.
He looked down at the deed in his hands and then back up at the crowd, his gaze sweeping over them, a patriarch speaking to his extended and beloved and deeply and flawed family.
That man, he tried to tell the world that Heartland was just a piece of land, a thing to be bought and sold and owned. But he was wrong. Heartland isn't just a place. It's a promise. It's the promise that no matter how broken a thing is, a person or a horse, it can be made whole again. He tried to break that promise. He tried to burn it to the ground. But that promise was never in the wood or the stone. It was in us. It's in all of us. And that is a thing that no fire can ever touch.
He paused, a small and tired and beautiful smile touching his lips.
Thank you for welcoming us. It's good to be home.
He stepped back from the podium, and the square erupted once more, a deep and cathartic and heartfelt roar of an approval. The ceremony was over. The healing had begun. As Jack made his way carefully down the steps of the stage, the family was gently and lovingly swamped. The crowd pressed in, but not with a frantic or a media-fueled energy. It was a slow and gentle tide of a shared and communal relief. An old rancher, a man who had been a rival of Jack's for 50 years, grabbed Tim's hand and just held it, his own eyes shining with a deep and unshed tears of a profound and unspoken apology. A group of Alu's friends from the town council surrounded her, their own faces a mask of a shame and a joy, their words a torrent of a tearful and heartfelt and welcome apologies. Amidst the quiet chaos, Ty and Amy found each other. They stood a few feet apart, a small and quiet island in the center of the emotional storm. The public part was over. The grand and necessary and public reclamation of their name was complete. And now, the long and quiet and private and much more difficult work of rebuilding their life could finally and truly begin. The family slowly extricated themselves from the loving embrace of the town, making their way back to their vehicles. The crowd parted for them, a silent and respectful honor guard. The journey back to the Dude Ranch was a different one. The heavy and nervous and somber silence of the morning had been replaced by a new and quiet and deeply and contemplative peace. The war was over. The victory was real, and now they were, for the first time, truly and completely and irrevocably on the road home. The convoy turned off the main highway and onto the long and familiar and winding gravel road that led to their land. The land that was, once again, theirs. Ty was driving the lead truck, with Jack in the passenger seat beside him. The old man was silent, his gaze fixed on the familiar and beloved and wounded landscape that was rolling past his window. He looked down at the document that was resting on his lap, the official and restored deed to his home, to his life, to his family's very soul, and he placed his own and gnarled and weathered and rancher's hands on top of it, a silent and protective and loving and final gesture. The great and terrible and long and dark and insane battle for Heartland was over. Its name had been cleared, its honor had been restored, and its legacy was, once again, safe in the hands of its one and true and rightful and loving king.